Hey global leader, welcome to Joyride with Expatriates. In this show, we bring every month a different person to talk about their expatriation experiences, how to manage cultural challenges, and how to become an effective person while living abroad. I am Tatyana Fittipaldi, and in this channel, we make videos to help global leaders just like you to become more effective, more productive, and improve their leadership, both in business and life. Today, we have the pleasure of talking with Daniel Beach. Dan is a Strategic Alliance Director at Vertical. He has extensive marketing experiences, including his own company. He lived in China for many years, and now he lives with his daughter in Singapore. Please join me in welcoming Dan to our show. Hey Dan, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Dan, how about we start by you telling us where you come from, and maybe tell us about, where have you, gone to, which countries you have been expatriated to, and tell us what you miss in those places and what you don't miss in those places.
Sure. So I'm originally from Canada, Ottawa, Canada. And so I left Canada about 18 years ago now. So I spent about 16 years in China, in Shenzhen, and moved with my daughter to Singapore, where we are now. And what do I miss? Well, Canada, I mean, I would say friends, family, food, all the F's. As well as other things like sport, and I miss watching a hockey game, or another thing is like concerts and things of that nature. We're kind of on tap whenever you wanted. If you wanted to see Metallica live, they would typically come around once every 1 or 2 years. So I do miss that, although I did get to see Metallica in Hong Kong once. China, yeah, I miss the speed. I miss the spontaneity, the food as well. Although there are some really great Chinese restaurants here in Singapore, it is actually surprisingly difficult to find the same level of variety. Let's say, well, China has hundreds of different kinds of food. There isn't just one Chinese food. So to find the same sort of variety is just quite difficult here in Singapore. But China's moving in a direction that's a little bit different from what I was used to during my stay there, and that is much more control from the government, and it's not moving toward a more open society, but more of a let's protect the downside. Let's make sure that we keep what we have, as opposed to during my stay was all about learn the new thing, eat the new food. What are they doing in France? What are they doing in the US? How can we do that? And you still have some of that, and I think a lot of people are still interested in learning about the world.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But from a government level, it's more about, okay, well, that's maybe enough for us at this point. That's probably too much. And of course, you've got the US and China not really being on the best terms at the moment. So yeah, there's also the element that Shenzhen in particular is quite a transient place, so people come and go quite often. And so for my little one, my daughter, what I wanted was a little bit more stability. And Singapore offers that.
In terms of a relationship, you mean?
Yeah, to have a place to call home, have friends, like lifelong friends that she'll know forever, even after she goes off to uni, that she'll have a place to come back to. And when we were thinking about moving over, we were thinking about a few places. Hong Kong was one, but at the time Hong Kong was kind of on fire with the protests and whatnot. So I thought maybe that's not the best spot. Australia was another option, a very close contender. And home, of course, Canada was another option. But for me, Canada's just a little bit too far away from the action. I still do feel very much like a lot of the growth that's going to happen in the next 30, 40 years is going to come out of Asia. All of my experiences is in Asia. I think a lot of what I've learned is applicable elsewhere, but where I think we are probably best placed to see that growth happen is, I mean, certainly in Southeast Asia, there's 500 million people here that are on the
Yeah, makes
same sort of
sense.
a track. Yeah, the same sort of a track that China was on or is on. And so it's going to be a really interesting, next part of my career, let's say, because I do feel like a lot of that economic activity is going to be out of Singapore, in fact, because this is sort of the heart of the Southeast Asian economy. But yeah, I mean, just keeping on the same track, I mean, Singapore is really stable, super stable, too stable. So you do miss the spontaneity sometimes, where in China it's what are you doing? Okay, well let's go do something there and then. Here it's like, what are you doing in 3 weeks? Let's put it in the
Really?
calendar.
So they're more, so in Singapore they sort of plan more, and in China they're more like, oh, let's do something.
It's very, yeah, it's
That's
it's
interesting.
and sometimes for some people that can be quite frustrating, right? It's like, let's have a meeting. When, who, now, everybody. That's sort of the China model, where we're here, it's obviously very specific. We're planning this meeting out a couple of weeks in advance. Here's a few slots. um, and it's just a different mindset, and that ability to react and move quickly is why China is moving at the pace that it is. But it also means that it's tireless, right? Like, you are always on, and so you really cannot stop, and you can't be switched off, right? So your WeChat is on all the time. It's used for friends, it's used for work, and if I need something, I can ask for it at really any point. There's no sense of like, oh, it's 7:30. Probably shouldn't text them. It's like, no, it's like 10 o'clock. What are you doing?
And
I
this
need
is
your help here.
in the entire Asia, or just China and Singapore? It's like a cultural thing to be on.
No, I
Uh,
wouldn't. I would never paint all of Asia with the same broad brush. Japan is different from Korea, is different from China, is different from Singapore, is different from the Philippines or Indonesia. Um, Singapore in particular, I would say is more like Japan, where things are very well organized, everybody's on time. Things happen when and as they should. Whereas in China, it's as fast as possible. Everything is as fast as possible. And so that's kind of a moving goalpost, right? Because sometimes it's faster, sometimes it's slower. Um, but because everybody's always on, things do happen remarkably quickly, right? And everybody's like ready to react. It's interesting, if you look at the way that people drive in China, you don't see very many accidents. And even though oftentimes people can drive a little crazy, but because everybody is aware, like ready for somebody to do something silly, and so it's reactive. And in that same kind of vein, everybody at work is quite reactive. They're ready to respond to whatever that stimuli is, and get something done. This is not to say that China doesn't plan. Of course it does. China is, a planned economy, so there's tons of planning that goes on, even in longer terms than you would expect out of the U.S. or elsewhere, in 5-year slots, and they do it to remarkable effect, right? They often achieve the goals that they set out in those plans. It's just that, and so
They're
that's at the macro
flexible.
level. Yeah, that's at the macro level, but at the micro level, especially in private enterprise, like if you're a startup, and this is where that 996 culture comes in. So 996 basically speaks to basically a full week of work, like you don't stop. You know, so in that sense, because you're always working, you're always able to pick up on both threats and opportunities. right? So in a way where if you're up against, say, an international firm who is, you know, working 9
Nine
to
to
5,
five.
yeah, you're way more competitive, not because you have the best ideas necessarily, but because you're always on.
You can react
Because
faster to everything,
yeah,
right? And be
yeah,
the first and be the first.
exactly. And you have the entire complement of cast to actually get that done. It's not like you have the founders at the you know, the Western firm that's working, you know, like an Elon Musk, for example. It's everybody is working at that pace. So you have the entire graph of everybody inside of the organization kind of ready at a moment's notice to drive that new initiative forward, to react to that bad PR that's come up, to do whatever is necessary in order to make the company successful. And this even happens at, you know, your large, you know, now multinational firms like your Alibabas and Baidu's. It's getting, I think, to a point where it's frowned upon because it's almost an excuse to not be efficient. It's just like, well, if everybody's working, what do I care if, you know, what you know, people spend their time on. But ultimately, you know, that is what is making China as successful it is, or at least a part of it in the, say, software space. So it's quite interesting, you know, how that dynamic plays out. And you don't really see the same thing here in Singapore. People are still hungry, even in the startup space, but it's not with the same sort of a vigor. Like there is a kind of palpable sense that time is running out in China. Like we need to do it now. Like if we don't do it now, we're going to lose. And then there won't be anything to be had.
So sense of urgency in China is you know, bigger than in Singapore. If you would compare both, you would say that in China they see this sense of urgency.
Yeah, well, because you it kind of relates to the Chinese dream, you know, relative or juxtaposed against the American dream, which was the same thing, right? Like you can get rich and have a great life if you work really, really hard. And I'd say in some senses that has faded in America, where you know, I'm not sure that everybody believes that if you work super, super hard that you're going to
Succeed.
you know, achieve great things. Yeah. Um, well, while I still think it's largely true, that it's just maybe some people don't want to work quite that hard. But in China, it's they have really come from, you know, nothing, where actually making money was illegal. Like, you know, earning a private salary that wasn't sort of government mandated out of the planned economy was not legal, right? It had to be whatever the government told you, and you got paid whatever the government mandated for that particular service or where. And only in the past 40 years has anybody really been able to make money and make as much money as is possible. And so that's quite remarkable, right? To go from, you know, one, or sorry, to zero, to from zero rather to one. And so for a lot of people in China, I feel like this is like an amazing opportunity. Let's, you know, go get it, get after it while the getting is good. You know, and all that low hanging fruit is kind of gone, right? Like everything that's infrastructure based, or everything that is, you know, real estate or hard asset based, like that's all kind of done. Like if you're not in yet, you're not in. So what's left? Well, innovation, right? That's where you can still win, because money can't buy ideas yet. Or money does buy ideas, just that you can come up with ideas because they're not locked in and they're not finite.
And when you say innovation, you mean like new patents, this kind of thing?
Yep. New patents, new ideas, new software companies, or even, you know, Western ideas executed well in China.
Oh, I see.
That's something that's very popular, right? Everybody talks about, you know, China copying everything. Yes, they do. This is true, and I think even China, you know, and Chinese entrepreneurs would admit this. You know, there's something called Shenzhen, which is to it's like kind of pirate, but innovate. There's like a culture. It started in the hardware space, but it's since moved on to the software space as well, wherein you're taking an existing idea, but you're innovating on top of it. So a lot of people in China, I would argue, you know, they make copy as a start, but they make it better, right? In a Chinese context. And often it is very much for a Chinese context, right? You could argue that, you know, WeChat sort of copied Facebook, but now it actually, in a weird sense, after WeChat has, you know, out innovated Facebook in many ways with the
Copied back.
yeah, now Facebook is copying everything that WeChat's done, right? So you know, WeChat started out of a company called Tencent, who initially was actually sued by ICQ, which is a messenger around the
Oh,
turn
I
of the century.
remember that.
You remember? Yeah, okay, you're aging yourself there a little bit. Yeah, so yeah, I remember ICQ as well. And so they basically copied it, you know, like for like. So they got sued. They changed the name to QQ. And then QQ, I think by around 2010, 2012, had about 800 million users. It was absolutely massive. But also at one of their spin-offs was WeChat, and WeChat was a standalone mobile messenger whose initial intent was just to, you know, message friends and family like you would do on QQ
WhatsApp.
or WhatsApp or what have you. Um, but then they started adding really neat features, right? They added like a news feed. The big one they added was a payment feature, so a digital wallet, which was really to compete with Alipay, which is owned by Alibaba. But what you got as a result of mixing these different sorts of things was a kind of recombinant innovation, where now you could buy things in chat. Now you could buy things in a social context, which hadn't really been possible before. And I don't think anybody had done it up until that
Yeah,
point.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so now you can buy absolutely everything on WeChat.
That's
And
interesting.
yeah, and the ability to scan QR codes as well is very, very interesting, because QR codes elsewhere in the world have been shunned, like, oh, that's tacky, I don't really like that. But in China, they are absolutely everywhere. And what you do when you slap a QR code on something is you make it smart. So all of a sudden, you know, that restaurant has a bunch of data behind it that I can scan, and now I'm a part of that data ecosystem. I can pay, I can see the menu, I can do
I
many different things,
see.
right? But also you had startups that came up as off the back of that, like Mobike, who, if you scan the bike, it would unlock it, and then all of a sudden you can ride it. They would track how long you rode it for rather, rid it.
And maybe they can even charge you. They know the
And
distance.
they did,
Oh,
and that in a heartbeat was, you saw millions of bikes across China parked everywhere. It was a mess. It was a total mess. But it spoke to the power of what happens when you take all of these little niche innovations and you slap them together in a good sort of user experience. What can come out of that? Well, you know, billions and billions and billions of dollars of value, and an amazing user experience. And now it's to the point where you, like, because I can now just scan a QR code to pay, I can send money to friends in an instant. Like, there's no barrier, there's no like 2FA or like security lock, because it's all just made very, very easy inside of the app. So I can send you money in a heartbeat. Well, nobody uses cash anymore. Like, China is the first cashless society in the world, and all because of this
this
little
innovation.
company. Yeah, this little company that got sued by ICQ for copying, you know, this original app, but then they innovated. But now Tencent's, like, I don't know what the market value is right now, but it's anywhere between $500 billion and $1 trillion worth of value that's been created out of that. And so that's kind of the model, and that company is very much your do anything, whatever it takes, get there, just do it, innovate or else kind of thing. And it's really fascinating to have seen that, because yeah, that company came up in sort of the same period that I was in China for, and is now one of the largest companies in China. It's really, really interesting.
That's fascinating. And so since you already introduced a little bit about that, I have a question. You know, most Westerns think that, you know, all Asia countries are kind of the same, right? They have this mindset now, oh, their culture are kind of the same. And it's usually something that happens also in Latin America, in Europe, people saying, oh, it's kind of the same, right? So let's break their paradigm here. And, you know, besides the sense of urgency, what else do you think Singapore and China have different?
Oh, vast amounts. I mean, China is itself really, really diverse and dynamic. I mean, yes, you do have predominantly Han Chinese, very sort of homogeneous society, but even within, say, just take for example food, all very, very different across the provinces. Languages also, there isn't one Chinese language. I'm not sure what the actual number is, but it's got to be in the hundreds of different Chinese languages. Everybody speaks Mandarin, right? Because that is the state mandated
The
language.
official language, I see.
Yeah, but that only really happened after Mao Zedong, made it happen. Up until that point, I mean, even people in Shanghai who have would speak the Shanghai dialect wouldn't be able to speak to someone from Guangdong who speak Cantonese. Um, they sometimes would even speak in English, if they didn't both speak Mandarin. Now, of course, that's quite different. Everybody speaks Mandarin, at least to some degree, and it is to varying degrees. Some people speak really great Mandarin if they're from the north. People from the south and certainly Hong Kong are sometimes made fun of for the way that they speak Mandarin because it's with a heavy accent. Um, but yeah, so that I think did a good job of unifying China in some ways, because yeah, of course, if you all speak different languages, it's much like Europe. It's difficult to do trade and business and make friends, etc. And so yeah, China is very interesting, and of course you've got political dynamic that is very different. I would suppose the irony in comparing these two countries is that I feel like a lot of what Lee Kuan Yew did to modernize Singapore and make Singapore the sort of bastion of capitalism that it is today was copied by Deng Xiaoping, who kind of led China out of the pure ideological version of communism that China had under Mao, and actually moved them toward more of a market economy. And so when he came up with Shenzhen, which is where I was, I think a lot of that was based on Singapore, and what Singapore had been doing, where Shenzhen was set up to really test the capitalist idea and whether it would work, in the Chinese economy. So it was called the Special Economic Zone. It was set up specifically next to Hong Kong, in order to benefit from the amount of trade, capital, etc., that could come from Hong Kong, and really was a model for the rest of the country. So anytime there's a new economic idea, it's always tested in Shenzhen first. And since then, you've got a few other special economic zones like Shanghai and even Zhuhai, which is right next door across from Macau. But the whole idea is, okay, well, as opposed to trying to change, a
The whole
country of
country.
one point, whatever billion people at the
That's
time,
pretty smart. Yeah.
it's pretty smart. Yeah,
Yeah,
that
very
that, that was
smart.
very
It's like
wise.
we do in the private sector. We do pilots, right?
Exactly. So they literally piloted a city. So there was nothing there, and then there was something there. And Shenzhen is now like going to the future. It is a metropolis of somewhere in the region of 20 million people. Economy is now bigger than Hong Kong, which is remarkable given the fact that it started from zero, and has like world-beating firms in every industry from finance to software manufacturing, biotech, like you name it, Shenzhen has it, because of course, every time they want to test something new, it goes there, right? And so, yeah, and as a result, you've got all of these amazing overlaps in technology and capability and business and know-how, that create sort of new things that wouldn't otherwise exist, kind of 1 + 1 = 3. So the value that gets generated out of Shenzhen is absolutely fascinating. Now, Singapore is, yeah, what if you had a Shenzhen, but you didn't have a China behind it? What would that look like? And that's exactly what you have here. Extremely good governance. And Singapore doesn't have as much leeway to make mistakes because, you've got a 700 square kilometer island. You need to keep it tight. You need to do things really, really well, and really, really efficiently. And so ultimately, that's the way that Singapore is governed, but also being very open to capitalism, to trade, has meant that, many of the world's biggest firms, when they're thinking about where to move their business, or put their headquarters in Asia, it's right here because your IP is going to be safe. You're going to be able to hire great people. You're really going to be able to make a go of Asia here. Lee Kuan Yew made a conscious decision to make English the kind of lingua franca.
Oh, really? Interesting.
So everyone in Singapore speaks English to a very high level.
That's smart. That's pretty smart.
Yeah, but at the same time, many people also speak Mandarin, right? So
because it's so next door that it's useful. Yeah.
So there's Singapore is a land for the times. It's really designed to be. It's run like a company. Honestly, it's run like a very well-run company.
And you mentioned something fascinating. You mentioned that the president earns like a CEO, right? That sounded fascinating.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, so it's just another good example. So that the president and cabinet ministers and everyone in the government earns a very high salary, because you are competing for talent with the private sector. And as opposed to have them looking for that revolving door, where in the private sector can I go after this to earn the big bucks? Rather, it's let me do a really good job in my role here because that's what I'm paid to do. So something I think that other governments could potentially learn from. So yeah, if you want great people in government, pay great people salaries, really. Yeah. And China could learn from this as well, because frankly, there's still a lot of corruption in China that happens as a result of people making very, very poor salaries. But yeah, I'm not sure what the appetite for that looks like in the Chinese Communist Party.
Especially because it's communist, right? So
I
don't know how that would work, right?
Yeah. China really doesn't have any of the characteristics of a communist nation anymore. China, if anything, China is probably the most purely capitalist country of their size in the world. So even more so, I feel, than the US in many ways. There are some limitations, of course, with regard to how one operates, but that has mostly to do with the government's locus of control than it does actual business outcomes. And even recently with the way that they have worked with or been dealing with companies like Didi Dacha, who is the Uber equivalent in China, or Alibaba and their most recent IPO. It's not been with a soft, velvety glove. The way that business often is treated in the US. It's been very harsh, and irrespective of the actual business outcomes. And I mean, we're talking tens of billions of dollars wiped out in value for shareholders. But the government still, gave them a slap and said, no, you're not doing the way things the way that things should be done. Or that we think they should be done. And as a result, here you go. We're going to investigate you for whatever data privacy or what have you. But I mean, yeah, that's sort of the way that China's come up is with the whatever works model. It isn't ideological at all.
Yeah, makes sense. Maybe the scholars will coin another term for the way they govern things, right? Right now they still call this communist, but I totally hear you. It doesn't make any more sense to say that this is really communist in the traditional sense. Yeah, makes sense. And then tell me something.
Exactly.
So you've been to these two places that, although they're close, they're very different. Tell us what were your biggest challenges, both in China and Singapore. When you first came, what were the biggest challenges you faced in terms of cultural adaptation?
Yeah. So China, yeah. When I went there was in 2003, and China wasn't nearly as developed as it is now. So there were a lot of things to get used to. Language was a big one, of course, as it is with any new country that isn't speaking your language. So and I mean, Chinese in particular is not the easiest language
Yeah,
for
it's very
I
difficult.
think Westerners to get. So that took a couple minutes. But then also just kind of getting used to the lack of norms. So China at the time did not have a lot of like really well ingrained social practices. So things like lining up when you're at a KFC. That wasn't a thing. You just go to the front of the queue, and the queue would look more like a wide triangle of people trying to get at the attention of
That
the
sounds like a Brazilian line too.
yeah. And that was really weird because here I would be just standing in line, getting increasingly frustrated and not actually being served. And so that took a long time to get used to. And then eventually, over time, the queue has formed, everywhere because, for the longest time, it was whoever gets the thing first gets the thing first. I don't care if you're being polite and standing in a queue. It's just get whatever you can get now, because
Who
there's
screams
probably not
first?
going to be. We're gonna run out of food, man. We're gonna or tickets for the hospital or whatever else. Like it was a very new notion at the time anyway. And a lot of the folks that had come that were in Shenzhen had never been in a big city. They were from the countryside, and it was very much a get what you can get now attitude. So that took some getting used to. Being away from home was probably the other biggest one. Just being somewhat lonely, at least for the first little while. And then food, yeah, food's huge. Chinese food is very, very different from what I'm used to, or what I was used to at the time. Now I absolutely love it.
Food is huge for
But
everyone. I've never heard someone saying that, food is not one of the key, adaptation issues.
yeah, yeah. Getting around in China, that was interesting. At the time, you had so there's a few modes of transportation. You had taxis, which were pretty crazy, but you had to tell the taxi driver where to go, which is really hard in Mandarin. So I mean, you could write it down, but it's not very efficient if you A, don't write, B, need to get somebody else to do it. Or you could take a normal bus, and those are fine, standard normal bus, or a minibus. And minibus is like an in between. You also had like a motor taxi, but those were dangerous as hell, and I didn't want to take those. Those guys are crazy. So were the minibuses though. So the minibuses are the most fun, I would say, because they didn't care. They would so there would be a red light, and because they had begun installing the cameras at the red light, they would drive on the sidewalk, go around the other lane, and then merge back into traffic so that they would miss the red light, because they get paid based on how many passengers they can get, not on a time basis, literally volume, right? So and the other thing is they would pack the bus so much, like they didn't care if you could fit on the bus, you can get on the bus. And fitting on the bus in a Western context for me would mean you've got enough seats. No. This is literally how many people you can actually get in the bus, which is more like a clown car. It's like a circus of people, and people need to get to work, right? And maybe the other bus is at an accident, so there's not been one in 10 minutes. It's like, well, shit, I guess I'm getting on this bus now. And so at that point, because the bus is so full, and they don't really stop at the bus stops, so you
So
have
how
people
do you
like
come out?
jump out the window, and so yeah, I've jumped out of the windows of several minibuses in order to get out, because he kind of he doesn't stop so much as he takes his foot off the gas, and the bus is still kind of rolling, so you're just like you're doing You're doing a sort of a barrel roll at the bus, trying not to break your ankle
You
or
have
run
to
into
get in the
anybody at the
office
bus stop.
and kind of, neat yourself up again because you're a mess.
Yeah. But luckily they banned those in Shenzhen, in addition to the motorcycle taxis, because those guys were nuts. Um, yeah, so now you only have like taxis of a certain level, and most of those are electric. I mean, those minibuses were like spewing black crud out of their exhaust. So I mean, it's changed quite a lot, right? It's quite amazing.
That's super interesting. I was cracking up. I was trying not to crack up, but I couldn't resist.
Yeah.
so
Uh,
so so Dan, you have a lot of marketing experience. You have, I don't know, so many years that I lost count. Going through your LinkedIn. So, what could be some tips you could give to entrepreneurs in a that went to another country and have to start from scratch as an entrepreneur? What are some marketing tips you could give to these guys?
sure. I would say it's the same as anywhere else. It doesn't matter where you are. I think number one goal should be, look, after you've come up with your brilliant idea, I'm sure it's fantastic. Learn who your customers are, and test that idea against them, and look for poor feedback. Like if somebody says your idea is bad, talk to them more. Like these are the folks that you need to understand. And maybe it's not a great product market fit, but at least you know then what not to do. And do that 100 times. Do it 500 times. Do it as many times as you can before you put a ton of money into this thing. And try to validate your idea with capital. Basically, it's the same rule as you would use in Silicon Valley or anywhere else. It's get out in front of your customer early and often, even if it is with a drawing or a rough prototype, whatever you can do. That's number one. And then basically do this the entire time you're developing the product. As you're starting to market it, like just keep testing, don't stop testing. You're not looking for the testing to slow you down, but rather to validate or invalidate your ideas, because what you think doesn't really matter actually. What your customers think matters, right? So I think the folly that most founders run into is they don't test. They're like, nope, brilliant idea. It's my idea. It's the greatest idea.
They get too
And
attached.
yeah, well, and they become the company as opposed to thinking about the company as a sort of third party, right? Like if somebody says that the product is bad or the idea is bad, then I am bad, and
Oh,
that's
so you're
obviously
saying
not
they kind
true.
of personalize that.
Yeah, they anthropomorphize the product or the company. It's like their baby. That's wrong. It's not. It's not your baby. It is a money-making machine, and that's what it should be. And you should treat it as such. And if the money-making machine is broken, you fix it, right? You don't fix a baby. It's not you. The company is meant to do a job. It is a thing that you create where you have a bunch of people who believe the same thing. You would hope that they believe the same thing. Otherwise, you've got sort of cultural mismatch. And you're all working toward the same goal to achieve the same mission. That's what it should be. If you're looking at trying to run something where you put culture first and not the actual mission, then you're going to run into trouble down the line. I think it's super important to realize that this thing is meant to do a job for customers, and if it's not doing that job, then it's not worth being around. And then ultimately, from a marketing perspective, it actually everything else stems from that, right? Because if I understand my customer like really well, and I have great personas that are set up around my customer, then everything else will sort of derive from that, will cascade from that. because then I can set up campaigns that are specifically designed to resolve the challenges that I know my customer has. And I can scale those up or down. That's really just investing some money in paid media. It's quite easy to do. Creative is all geared toward the type of person that you're actually trying to reach, who again, you know very well. And then you should expect sales from at a certain conversion rate. So I think if everybody just did that, we'd have a much lower failure rate and a lot more happy people. Yeah, just validate your ideas. Go talk to your customers. Like, and I mean,
I love
literally
it.
talk
It's
to your
the whole
customers.
idea of voice of the customer, right?
Yeah.
VOC. So I hear you. So that we should, this is a good, a very good set of you know, recommendations. And I think you're right. You know, when we go to a different country, sometimes, because this is pretty basic, but sometimes we go to a different country and we get so overwhelmed by so many things that, you know, are different, that we sort of, you know, forget the basics, right? And
Principles. Yeah.
basically you're saying, you know, go back to the basics, man.
Yeah, it can, well, because the same is true, right? Also, yeah, so these customers are in a different country. Maybe they speak a different language, they eat a different food. So that means you need to validate it more, not less. You need to talk to more customers. You need to understand these customers more. Like, why would you assume that you know more in this foreign place than you would otherwise, right? So that's the trick, and it's not even a trick. It's a really basic tenet of you know, founding a new company with a new idea. Just know your customer.
That's great. So how about we talk about some fun now? I want to hear about the Strava app. You know, you mentioned to me, oh my God, you know, I went to Singapore right before, you know, COVID madness. And so tell me how, you know, how this whole Strava thing for you started.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, we moved over just a few months before the pandemic hit. And I should preface this by saying that, like, part of the allure of Singapore is that you can, first of all, best airport in the world, like 10 years in a row, best airline in the world, like 10 years in a row. So there's a good reason for that, and that's because you can travel anywhere in the world out of Singapore, and particularly in Southeast Asia, to amazing, very diverse places for next to nothing, right? So you can go to Vietnam for like under $100. You can go over a weekend. You can go to Thailand for like under $100. You can go to Bali. You can go to Australia. You can go like Philippines, wherever, Hong Kong, China.
I like it already.
and so that is part of the allure, right? Because it's like, yeah, before the pandemic, we would pop over to Phuket for the weekend, you know, and it's like, I think it was like $240 with tax for me and my daughter to go and spend the weekend in Phuket, which is itself very cheap, right, relative to Singapore, which is very expensive. So even if I spent a normal, oh, thanks, buddy. Thanks, pal. So I got a cupcake. So yeah, so that was part of the allure. And then Singapore itself is actually quite small. It's only 700 square kilometers. So when the lockdown hit and we were no longer allowed to travel, it's like, okay, what are we gonna do now? And so the only things that you could do were, and I think this is the same for most countries with significant lockdowns, you could go to the grocery store. You could go for a run, or you could go biking. And this is like during the most severe portion of the lockdown. And there were even some questions like, do you wear a mask or don't you wear a mask when you're doing physical activity? Because the science wasn't really in yet. I think everybody just opted because you couldn't really breathe with the mask on if you're moving at
exercising,
at a real clip. Yeah, so I bought a bike, which is lucky that I bought it when I did, because now you can't even buy a bike. There's just no stock. And I decided that I was going to give this biking thing a go. Singapore is actually very bike friendly, where Shenzhen for the longest time, better now, but for the longest time was not, because road traffic in China is, again, kind of scary. Yeah. But yes, now everybody in Singapore is on a bike. It's not everybody, I'm over exaggerating, but there's a lot of bikers in Singapore now. And so I started off going, like 18 kilometers an hour, which on a bike is very, very slow, especially a road bike. And now I'm quite a bit quicker because we go out for work and whatnot. And yeah, the big one that we did was actually we did the entire island. So we circumnavigated the country in a single day, which is about 120 kilometers, depending on the route you take,
Wow, that's a
anywhere
lot.
between 120 and 130 kilometers. Yeah. And in one day we did it for work. It was great. We got kitted. We had our own pink
Shirt.
shirts. Yeah. And yeah, that was great. Started at 4:30 in the morning, ended up somewhere in the region of I think 11:30. So we weren't going for speed. We were really just looking to finish. Yeah, I'm looking forward to doing it again. It'll be a lot of fun. And now everybody. So speaking of Strava, now everybody's just on this app looking at. It's almost replaced golf in a way. Like all of the business folks that I work with in a partnership perspective, they're all biking around town, and so everybody's like checking out who's the fastest, who's going faster on average than the other folks, and it's a topic of conversation that I work with. It's quite interesting.
That's amazing. That's really amazing. And I imagine you guys, at least for you that, just came to Singapore, you probably made some friends too through this, this whole biking thing, right?
Yeah, well, not just that. I mean, like even just because, yeah, I mean, you need people to go biking with. So, this app is an interesting way to see the people that you already know, because it suggests your friends or people that you're connected with. And you're like, oh, what are you doing Saturday? And so I've got a lot of, like I said, work people that I work with, but that work at other companies, right? I'm in a partnership role. So yeah, we'll go with them. We'll go in, with workmates alone, and as a means by which to network. It's been fantastic. Yeah.
That's great. Sports and networking. That's an amazing
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
combination. Getting
Yeah.
healthy and networking. That's really amazing. So then tell me what, you've been you went from Canada to China and then from China to Singapore. What did these expatriation experiences teach you?
Well, everything in my context, because I spent most of my adult years have been overseas. So in fact, by September of this year, I will have spent more time outside of Canada than in. So I'm really more of an expat than actually Canadian. Which, I mean, I'm Canadian through and through, and I'll never lose the accent, certainly not. But I'll certainly have spent more and learned more time, keeping in mind that many of those Canadian years were spent in a diaper. I think, yeah, in waking conscious learning terms, I've spent a great deal more time overseas than in Canada. Yeah, but I guess probably number one is it taught me how to learn and teach myself, because yeah, I mean, you grow up being taught. What I learned, because I kind of cut and run. I just went. I didn't really prepare, and I'm sort of my modus operandi, and maybe I get myself into trouble sometimes, but I just kind of go for it. You know, I once I feel like I have enough information, I'll just try. And it just so happened that trying meant hopping on a plane, flying, 15,000 kilometers in the other direction, and hoping for the best. But that's been an absolutely massive asset, because I have tried and failed, sure, but it's been small failures where I could pick myself up and keep going. And that ability to just test and try again and test and try again has been really, really valuable for me, because I know that I'm not going to die if I go and try this new thing, or go to this new place, I will survive and live to fight another day. And so that's allowed me to learn at a rapid pace, like in a way that I never would have otherwise. It's hard to say like how much, or what would the difference be if I stayed home in Canada. I'm not sure that I ever could or would. Was I always destined to hop on that plane and go overseas in some form or fashion? I think probably likely. Yeah, if anything, it's just made me more aware of the world and my place in it, bigger yet smaller at the same time.
That's an amazing answer. So you learned and you grew. That's an amazing answer. Oh my goodness. I loved it. I loved it. And wow. So I have only two other questions for you. It's not exactly questions, but the first one is about hand gestures. And this is what I've been doing in the last in the last episodes, because people are really interested about, how to communicate in gestures, because sometimes gesture in one place means one thing, but the same gesture somewhere else has, either a different meaning or it doesn't communicate anything, right? So I was thinking about talking about if you can recall any gesture, either from Canada or from China or from Singapore, that you recall that they use a lot and has a specific meaning.
Not really. I mean, the only thing that I could think of would be like the way they count. So how do you count? Show me how you would count on your fingers.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, keep going.
10.
Yep, there you go. Okay. So in China, especially when you're playing dice, there's like 1、2、3、4、5。what's 6、7, I think 8, and then 9. No, is that 9? I can't remember. And then 10. So it's the Chinese characters on your fingers, basically, that I've just totally screwed up. But you get the idea. It's very, very different. So when you're at the cash, for example, you can imagine when you're at the cash, for example, trying to pay, and you're like, how much is it? And then they give you the number, but they're like, it's that much. And you're like, how many?
What's that?
Yeah.
That's interesting. And let me ask you something. So you said this is 10, right? So
Yeah.
so what does so when you I see a lot of in Asian movies they doing something like this that means no for them. Is this something that in China or in Singapore they also do?
I'm not familiar, no. And this one is literally the character. So 10 is a cross, and that means 10. I don't know that I've ever seen, is it like this? Is this like a kung fu stance? I don't know. I've not seen that one before, no.
That's interesting. That's super interesting because, I would never imagine that, people would count differently in different places, right? I would guess that everybody counts the same. So it's interesting that you're bringing this up. That's great. So, and my last one is the card. So basically, I think I mentioned this offline to you. Did I?
You might have to refresh my memory.
Yeah, so let me refresh your mind. So basically, that's what's going to happen, and I do this in every show since the first one. I am going to show you a card from a deck of cards that we sell at Coaching Expatriates, and you're going to read the card out loud. It's just a couple of sentences, and then you're going to tell anything that comes to your mind. The first thing that pops in your mind related to what you read. Okay, how about that?
Okay, let's try. I have no idea what to expect. Yeah.
Okay, so let me share this with you.
Okay, I decide that I am not a victim of fate. My destiny is to create my own experiences. I am in control of my life. Life's experiences unfold according to my own devisement and actions. Destiny. kind of reminds me of that that poem from Invictus. I'm the captain of my ship.
Ooh, I like that. I am the captain of my ship. I really like
Yeah,
that.
I'd have to find the poem again because I don't recall it offhand. But it's not Desiderata, although that is another interesting poem, especially the version that Spock says. But yeah, that was particularly useful for me. That poem in particular. Yeah, during a tough point in my life, it's quite interesting. Yeah.
So,
So
so
I'm
what
not
do you, what comes to your mind when you think about it?
uh a bunch of things really. But I suppose in my context, whenever I feel like life is happening to me, as opposed to me happening to life, I kind of bring myself back to that place. Look, I don't really believe in destiny or fate, or anything of that nature, but I do believe in that you have the ability to create or plan or drive a set of actions that will create a particular outcome. And it, depending on how many things that you need to put into place, or how much energy or how many actions that are required in order to achieve that outcome, I think are sort of aligned to how lofty and ambitious that outcome might be. So Elon Musk wants to get to Mars. Well, there's probably a trillion and one actions that he's got to do, an infinite amount of energy. But oftentimes, if you find yourself in a place where I want to be happy, which is a bit of a false flag. I wouldn't go for happiness. Happiness is an outcome of the goal of getting somewhere, going somewhere. Rather, if I want to achieve something, it's often just okay, well, what do you need to do in order to get there? Getting off a plane in Hong Kong and being like, oh shit, I'm in Hong Kong. What do I do now? And then just creating a list and going and doing it. And then all of a sudden everything is okay. That's sort of the way that I think about my life. And yeah, that's what it makes me think about.
That's great. I also believe that, I believe that, people say about destiny and fate, etc. But I think we create our own experiences. As you said, we put things into motion and things happen, right? And we must feel responsible for, the things we're creating, in the sense that we are responsible for making things happen, right? Go after what we want and do something about it. So I hear you. I like it. Ben, thank you so much for being here. You are such a fun guy to talk with. I really had a great experience. I hope you did too. And I am so thankful for you. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your experiences.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you. Hey, I want to tell you one more thing. You are a global leader. The question is, do you have all the skills that you need to succeed? I'd love to help. I save my very best tips for my subscribers. Subscribe for free at coachingexpatriates.com. I know your inbox is sacred, so I promise I will send you emails that you will love. Whoa, what a joyride, right? I really enjoy these talks, and I hope you do too. If you like the show, please make sure to share with your friends and give us a thumbs up so that other people can find us. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so that you can be notified when we have new things. Thank you so much for watching.